Hello friends and welcome back. This is Dawn with another video for Honeybee Stamps. So in one of my previous videos, I painted the images here from Eternal Love, and one of them chose to be a problem child, and we went in a totally different direction and ended up turning this into a beautiful vintage shabby card. A lot of you wanted to see the process for creating the rest of this card, so that's what we're going to do today. Now, besides Eternal Love, which is the main imagery of this card, we threw in a lot of other things from this release. So we've got the lovely layers Sweetheart Roses here. This is adorable. I love it. The new red rubber background here. This is the Flora background. We use some postmarked here for accents. We use the Lacy Hearts Layers die. This is another one of my favorites from this release. And then we even used one of these little guys here, and this is from the, what is this? I will have it linked below. I'll have everything that we use in today's card linked in the description below. All right, so let's take a look at the original card here. Now, this was not the original idea. I was going for clean and simple. As you can see, we are far from that. But if you'd like to see the original, the painting of this imagery, then make sure you check the description box below. I'll have a link to that. So in the original, I meant for this to be the focal point, but things happened and we ended up moving this to be in the background. So treating it almost like a piece of old ephemera, maybe an old postcard or something like that. And we brought the focus onto the Sweetheart Roses here. So let's go ahead and recreate this card. Now I've already painted out another one of these Morning Glories here from Eternal Love. In fact, I painted two. One, not so great. I wouldn't use it as a focal point, but the blue one I would use as a focal point. But for the sake of recreating this card, we're going to push it to the background. Now, I just wanted to mention, this is great for your practice pieces. So say you paint something, it's not really, you're not loving it, you don't want to kind of make it the star of the show, that would be a perfect candidate to use for this technique. Push it into the background. We're going to be adding a lot of layers and stuff over top of this, so it's a great way to fit in your practice, your watercolor practice, but also not have it go to waste. All right, so I've trimmed this down and now it's time to start building like a collage in the background. And for that, I'm going to use the postmarked. This has a lot of great little images in it that you can build out a little collage around our Morning Glories here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to build around, behind, and on top of this image. So some of this I'm going to stamp over top of the image. Some of it I'm going to make it go behind the image. This is just going to make it look like they're more integrated. So I'm using Distress Oxide Ground Espresso here, and I'm applying my ink with a dauber. The reason I'm applying with a dauber is because I can control the amount of coverage that I get on this tiny little script stamp. And I want it to look more bold in some areas and more faded in other areas. And I also don't want to stamp some areas. So for this particular part, I don't want it to go over the image. I want it to be behind the image. So that way I can just not ink up any portions of the stamp that are going over the image. I'm going to clean it and reposition it and do the exact same thing. Again, I don't want to stamp over the image with this one. This one I want to look like it goes behind the image. So this is one way to build up something that looks like this was all created at the same time. So here I'm just checking which areas of the stamp I want to ink. I'm only going to ink the last 3 lines here, and again I'm going to ink it unevenly. There we go. And now it looks like that script fades in and out. I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to clean off my stamp. Maybe I do it 2 more times. I can't remember. But I'm going to create a diagonal here. So this is going to give it balance. I want a little bit of this script peeking out up here in the upper left corner to balance what we've done at the right corner. And then you'll notice that I brought that script more towards the middle of the image, creating a kind of visual triangle there. Now to connect those 2 areas and make it look seamless, I am going to stamp this one more time. I'm going to line this up over the image, and then I'm just going to concentrate on inking up some of the areas in between those flowers. If I get a little bit over the image, I'm not too worried about it, but there you can see I've got just the tiniest bit peeking there. And it's just enough to create that continuity. All right, for the next one, we're going to stamp directly over the image. I've grabbed that carte postale phrase there. And again, we're going to stamp that in the Ground Espresso. I'm going to go pretty dark and bold here because we're using the Distress line of inks, specifically the oxides here. I can add a little bit of water here and there and create a worn, aged look to this image so that it doesn't look so crisp and clean. There we go. Okay, so for some balance, we're going to add some more heavier ground espresso here in this upper right-hand corner. I'm stamping out Special Delivery. And then for a little bit of color, I'm going to use this little flourish detail, and we're going to stamp that in the Faded Jeans. And again, I'm always using the ink dauber to do my inking for this so that I can control the amount of ink that is applied. All right, so this looks great as is. You could use this if you wanted to keep it nice and clean, like it's fresh and brand new, but we gotta grunge this up just a little bit, and for that we're gonna use a little bit of water. Now we're gonna start off small and we're gonna progressively get more and more grungy, a little bit more distressed and worn. But I wanted to show the whole process because you could stop at any point here, right? You could leave it just like this, or you could start taking a wet paintbrush, a little bit of water, and then just start distressing this a little bit. So because again, we're using those oxides, these are water reactive, so I can come in here, add a little bit of water to the areas that I've stamped, and it's going to cause that ink to bleed a little bit. And this is going to look like maybe at some point this had some water damage, but it's not completely grunged up. This is a great look, and I could stop here, and often I do. But for this one, we went even further. All right, so I'm going to stop here and dry it back. It's always a good idea to dry periodically in between because you want things to layer on top of each other, and if you just keep mixing things around or adding extra distressing while everything is still wet, it's going to mix together and it's going to create this muddy mess rather than layering on top of each other. So I'm going to go ahead and dry this back really well because the next thing I want to do is add some heat embossing. And for that, I'm going to use this Flora background stamp. I love, this might be one of my favorite things from this release. It's really hard to choose a favorite from this release. There's a lot of really good stuff. But what I'm going to do is partially ink up this background. I want to concentrate more on the text and the postmarks and more abstract things like that rather than the florals. Now, I've already got my florals here. I've watercolored the florals, and I don't want any other florals on here to compete. So instead, I'm going to selectively ink up all of these more abstract items, the text and things like that, with some Versamark. And then I'm going to just kind of half stamp it in certain areas. So you can see here, I'm using one hand to hold up the majority of the stamp set, and then I'm using my fingers to just push down the areas that I want to make contact with the paper. This is going to give me an uneven stamping, and it's going to allow me to target just the areas of the stamp that I want to stamp. And then I'm going to cover that with my embossing powder. I'm using Parissa by Wow. This is a beautiful embossing powder. It's kind of a mix of silver, gold, copper, all of it. It's like molten lava. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But the nice thing about this is because we used the Versamark watermarking ink, if it gets in any areas that I don't want it, I can just simply brush it away with a soft brush, and then only melt the parts that I want to stay. So here, I've let it go over top of my image. I'm fine with that. If you did not want it to go over top of your image, just use a dry brush to brush away any areas that you don't want to emboss. Now this particular embossing powder is quite chunky, and so it takes a little bit longer to melt. What I like to do is just kind of start it melting, keep my gun moving, then I'll come back and re-hit areas. This way I can avoid scorching my paper. Although in this case, it wouldn't matter if you scorched your paper, it would probably just add to that aged look. Okay, now I did want to show you one other option. So the purple Morning Glories that I painted, I did them a little bit different. So instead of creating my own collage in the background, what I did was I took that Flora background stamp, inked it up with pumice stone unevenly, sprayed it with water, and then stamped it over top. So you can see here you got a more organic look to your background collage. Then I just added a few key elements over top, that carte postale, the special delivery. And now what we're going to do is we already used that Flora background. Instead of using that to do your heat embossing, I'm simply going to use some water to flick some water spots onto this paper. Now you can heat emboss with water. Embossing powder will stick anywhere that there's moisture. So now I'm just going to pour that embossing powder over my panel everywhere where I flicked water. And again, anywhere that you don't want it, use a dry brush to brush it away. I'm going for that aged, distressed, imperfect look anyway, so it doesn't matter. And now you just simply heat it. If you're doing this on regular cardstock, you want to start from the back to get it started melting, because water dries quickly, and as soon as the moisture's gone, your embossing powder will fall off as well. But because I'm using watercolor paper, which is 100% cotton, it's when I flicked that water, it's soaking into the paper. Cotton takes longer to dry than paper, so it's holding on to it much longer, so I don't really have to worry about that. Now that property that I talked about for the Parissa embossing powder here, you're going to be able to see it really well because we have large areas of it. You can see how as I melt this, it kind of beads up like little BBs. And then as I continue to heat it, they will all kind of meld in together like molten metal. It's absolutely one of my, it might be my favorite. It might be my favorite embossing powder if I'm right up there with the white puff powder. This one right here is just magical. It's magical to watch this one melt. All right, so I don't end up making a card with this panel. I just wanted to show you another option. So this one would be perfectly usable as well, and it might be a little bit easier if you're not comfortable building your own collage. You could just use that floral background stamp. Okay, so back to the main attraction here. We need to create some pieces to do our die cutting from. So I've grabbed some distress watercolor cardstock here, along with some distress spray stains and some spray oxides and some inks. And we're going to do some ink smushing to create our panels in relevant colors. So for the first one, we're going to do some browns. We're going to die cut the slice and stump here from our cardstock. This is going to be the base that we're going to arrange our roses on. And we're going to create each panel basically the same way. So for this one, we're going to do the browns like I mentioned. I'm going to spray down some walnut stain onto my craft mat. I'm going to spray that with water, and then I'm also going to spray my panel here. And then I'm just going to start dipping and pouncing and moving it around. There is no real rhyme or reason to this. I'm just trying to get color on the background. Now, I don't like to go too heavy with my color. I can always add more. I just want a good variation of lights and darks. And then after I put my die cuts together, if I want to darken up any areas, I can do that with a paintbrush and some ink and just kind of spot darken them up. This way, all of my stuff isn't very flat. I want some good difference in values and colors there. And that's why I've laid down a little bit of the Distress Oxide in Gathered Twigs now. That's going to give me a little bit more of a warmer brown than that walnut stain did. And I am going to dry this in between each layer so that my colors actually layer on top of each other instead of just blending together. And then once it's how I like it, I'm going to put that aside to fully dry, and we're going to move on to the next color. I like to create all of my colored panels at once while I've got my mat out and I'm in the inky zone. So now we're going to work on the yellow for the roses. Now I like to start with Distress ink because Distress Oxide will almost always sit on top of the ink. So I'm going to start off with a little scattered straw. I also like to work light to dark. You could put these all down together, then just start smushing and drying in between and re-smushing and just, you get what you get. But I have a little issue with that sometimes. I like to retain a little bit of control. So I've put down a little of that scattered straw Distress ink, sprayed some water on the mat and my cardstock, and I'm going to pick up my first layer and dry that. For a little bit deeper color, I'm going to pull out the Fossilized Amber Distress Oxide spray. Again, I prefer to spray it on my mat and pick up from there, but you could spray direct to your cardstock if you wanted. I'm going to spray that down, add some water, and then I'm going to just start dipping and pouncing. So you can see this is going to give me a stronger concentration and a little bit deeper, a little more toward the orangey side of this yellow, and that's going to break up that light yellow nicely. Go in for another layer, dry that, and then finally I'm going to add just a little bit of Rusty Hinge. But instead of spraying this one, I'm going to use the nozzle just to flick a little bit onto the mat. Rusty Hinge is quite strong and it could quickly overpower that fossilized amber. This way I'm able to just get the littlest bit and I can control exactly how much of that orange I get in there, because I still want yellow roses. I don't want orange roses. I just want a hint of that darker color speckled throughout this background. And then I'll do the same thing for the greens as well. Now this is what I'm going to cut my leaves from. I think for this one, I used a little bit of bundled sage along with forest moss and a little bit of rustic wilderness. And with those complete and dry, I move on to die cutting from each of the panels. You can be selective about where you cut from, or you can just leave it to chance. Now I'm going to have a lot of variation in each of these pieces. That's awesome. However, when I layer them on top of each other, they can kind of blend into each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that dauber, the Distress Oxide ink here in Ground Espresso, and we're just going to tap the edges of each of these die cuts. I am not blending real far into the die cut. You can see here I'm just kind of tapping the edges and allowing it to just kind of deepen up the edges. And again, I'll do this for each piece. Finally, I'm going to take my finger with a little bit of Ground Espresso on it, and I'm just going to lightly brush it across the tops of these dies. These dies have a lot of debossed details in them, and by lightly skimming across the top of them, I'm going to hit the high points of the die, and I'm going to bring out those debossed details. It's going to help them show up and stand out a little bit more. So once those are done, we will adhere them together, and then we'll set them aside to dry, and we can work on our roses. So I'll cut the base or the stems there from the green, and then I will cut the rose flowers themselves from the yellow. Now I have a little trick for the roses. Each of the blooms are contained on one die in this set. So you've got, I think it's 4 blooms, maybe 3. 1, 2, 3, I think it's 4. 4 blooms, and each of the pieces for each bloom are contained on one die. So I like to pull out a sticky mat here. This is the Altenew Stamp Wheel Mat Insert, and I take them out of the die grouped together. So here we've got this one die has these 3 pieces. So I'm going to take those off and I'm going to stick them down onto my sticky mat in a little group together. This is going to keep me from getting the pieces confused. So then I'm going to take that die and move it out of the way, and then I'm going to work on the next flower bud. So I'm going to kind of take this die out, and then I'm going to grab all of the pieces that belong to that die, and I'm going to stick them in a group on my mat. And I'm going to do this for each of the flowers. Again, this is going to keep all of the ones that go together grouped together and keep me from getting them confused. Then once I have them grouped together, I'm going to arrange them in order. So I'm just going to line them up in the order that they're going to be glued together. So I can take this opportunity to kind of figure out how they go together. And then I'm going to lay them out in order from bottom to top, and that way I can just go straight down the line and adhere them one on top of the next. Now these are pretty easy to figure out. They usually are the largest layer is going to be the bottom, and then each layer is going to get progressively smaller, allowing more and more of the bottom layers to show. I love these dies so much. You guys know I'm a huge fan of the lovely layers, and I think this is just another fun way to use them. Ink smushing and letting all of the color go to chance is really fun. I do absolutely love to color blend them. You guys know that I'm kind of obsessive when it comes to color blending all of the shadows and all of that good stuff. But for these types of cards, I really like the spontaneity and the organic look that you get from just leaving it to chance. All right, so now that we've got these all put together, I'm just going to adhere the flowers themselves to the base here, the greenery and the stems, and then we're ready to start assembling our card. Now off camera, I went ahead and die cut our panel here from the Lacy Hearts frame die. And now I'm going to add a little bit of a textile, little tactile dimension here to the background with a little bit of cheesecloth. There was a reason I added this to the first card. I don't think it's absolutely necessary here on this version. Even though we're duplicating the first card, they're going to turn out a little bit different because so much of this is kind of random. But I still decided to add it to this one because I've gotten questions about how to add the fabrics and stuff, how I use the sewing machine. First of all, I'm not a seamstress. I'm going to do a straight stitch, and that's it. I'm just going to do a straight stitch down the center of this cheesecloth, and it's going to be messy, and I'm going to do it 3 times because I want lots of extra strings to hang off the side because I personally like that. If you don't, you can trim them. And all of that messy stitching is going to be hidden behind our wood slice anyway, so it doesn't matter if it's perfect or not. I can sew a straight line, but my sewing machine is a little wonky, okay? First of all, I can't use the reverse. I don't know what I've done to this thing. I can't use the reverse because if I use the reverse, it gets stuck in reverse. So once I figured that out and once I finally got it out of reverse, I decided never to use reverse again. Secondly, even though I set the stitch length and the stitch tension and everything, the width perfectly, it wants to put all the stitches super close together, almost like it's perforating the cardstock, and I could rip it if I put any kind of tension on it whatsoever. After a while, it kind of like decides to act right, and the stitching length will be correct. I need a new sewing machine. We're gonna go, long story short, I need a new sewing machine. But you know, hey, it is what it is. Works for paper. All right, so now that we've got all of our base complete, it's time to start assembling everything on top of it. I'm going to speed this up, obviously, because I don't move this fast. But basically, I'm just going to start temporarily adhering things in place. Now, I'm using permanent adhesive, but I say temporarily because I'm not going to use a ton of adhesive to start. I just need enough adhesive to hold things in place because I'm going to do a lot of tucking. After I finish the whole design, I can go through and check for points that need more adhesive and then add it as needed. I'll use my tweezers to tuck extra tape in there, things like that. But for now, I just need it to hold it in place. You'll see here, this is kind of floppy. That's okay. I want to be able to stick things underneath our little wood slice there. So again, just enough to tack it into place. I'm using 2 heights of adhesive. I'm using a very low profile adhesive, and then I'm using a thicker, higher adhesive. This is going to help me to create even more dimension, help things clear each other, because that the cheesecloth there, it's bunched up underneath. It creates a little bit of height, which meant that I needed to use a thicker foam tape on the smaller wood slice so that it would clear the other wood slice. And now, instead of using this this rose as a whole arrangement, I'm going to cut it into pieces. This is going to allow me to create a custom arrangement. And this will take me a little while to kind of fuss around with and get it exactly like I wanted it. The other one I had cut into pieces also, and so it was almost impossible to remember exactly how I had cut it into pieces. So I decided not to try to exactly recreate this portion, just to use it as inspiration and create another rose arrangement to lay over top of these wood slices. So you can see here I'm cutting them into pieces. I'm playing around with how they are going to fit in here. At first I was going to put this larger one on top and the smaller one behind. Eventually I believe that I swapped them. So I'll put this larger arrangement behind my wood slice, and then I will bring that little bud to the front. Both look great. This would have worked. You've got a nice little triangle going there. It matches the flow of the wood slices. You've got extra little leaves here that you can add to fill out the area. But again, like I said, I opted to swap these two. All right, I knew I needed this little postage label thing here to ground my sentiment, give it somewhere to kind of rest. I'm distressing that with a little bit of distress ink and ground espresso, spritz it with some water, tap it around. This is going to give me that same aged effect that I have on everything else. And then I'll just use my fingers to kind of crumple it, and my fingernails, I'll run those along the edges to kind of distress the edges. Again, you can't make it look old enough. Just go to town. Even if you rip it, that's fine too. Really, it's just going to ground our sentiment. All right, so now I need to make sure, that before I adhere anything down, I need to make sure that I'm going to have room for everything. All right, I know my sentiment is going to go about right here. So this large rose is going to sit over top of it. It's going to hang over it some. That means that I'm going to need to put some foam adhesive behind that rose. I can't adhere it straight to our slice. So I'm going to go ahead and start tucking in some adhesive to hold things in place. I'm happy with where our smaller roses are there in the background. And I'm happy with where my bud is. So again, I'm going to go in there and start reinforcing some of the adhesive on these things so they don't move on me. Still not putting too much because our arrangement's a little bare. So I know I'm going to have to tuck in more things. Anywhere that I can adhere 2 elements together, like if I already know that they're going to stay together as a group, I'll go ahead and adhere those together so I can move them as one unit. So like this little bud and that rose. And this will just make it easier for me to now move its placement, change its direction, things like that. All right, so now we've got everything pretty much in place, and it's time to fill out our arrangement. So there's some little gaps and bare spots in here, and in the previous card I used these little swirly tendril like things from the Lacy Heart layers die. I could have used that here, but I noticed sitting on my desk that I had a little piece from the Wildflowers Lovely Layers die, and it was already in the appropriate colors. It was blue and green, and I was like, well, let's see if this will work. And lo and behold, it looks great with it, so I ran with it. I usually keep a little box of what I call doodads. It's all of my extra little die cuts or my extra little pieces that I've watercolored or whatnot, and I keep those in a box, and sometimes if I just need a little something here or there, then I pull from that. So this kind of came from my box of doodads, already appropriately colored, and it works beautifully. All right, so with the main arrangement done, it was time to add a little bit of twine around the bottom. I wrapped it 3 times. And then I'll use my reverse tweezers here to hold it in place while I tie a bow, and that will finish that part. Now all we have to do is create our base and add our sentiment. So I've got a piece of watercolor cardstock here that I've cut slightly larger than our focal panel, and we're just going to grunge it up a little bit. I've put some pumice stone distress oxide ink here on my my work surface and sprayed it with water, and now I'm just dipping that watercolor paper into that pumice stone. Pumice stone is one of my favorites for adding a very, very subtle distressing. So it's going to take away that bright whiteness, but it doesn't look super dirty. It just kind of softens a little bit. So pumice stone distress oxide, if you don't have this one, I highly recommend it. It is perfect, especially if you like the shabby chic look. And then just to tie in that ground espresso, I'm going to hit the edges a little bit with the dauber there, and then I'm going to use a wet finger and a little bit of that pumice stone there on the mat to kind of soften it a little bit. And this is going to work perfectly for tying in that ground espresso without it being too harsh or too overpowering. So here you can see we've got our perfectly distressed backdrop here for our focal panel. And then I'm just going to take my fingernail and rough up these edges. Again, this is watercolor paper, so it is 100% cotton, so it can take quite a beating. I'm just going to run my fingernail across the edges. I'm going to bend up some of the corners. Again, just make this look aged, like it's been around the block a few times. All right, so I went ahead and cut one more panel from that Lacy Hearts frame layering dies, and again, we're going to distress it. This time, we're going to distress this one the least. Again, I'm just using my finger and that dauber to just pick up a little bit of ink and then gently rub it across the tops of these debossed details. And then all we have left to do is adhere everything together. So let's go ahead and review the finished card. All right, so here they are side by side. We have our original card, which was the problem child in our original video where we did all of the watercoloring of the Eternal Love images. Now, this one came about completely by accident. We had a boo-boo and I had to go a totally different direction. But you guys loved it so much that you wanted to see the creation of the card itself, so that is what spawned this video. Here you can see they're similar, but they're not identical, and that is because we are using the same techniques, but those techniques themselves are very spontaneous. So your results are never going to be exactly the same. They will be similar, but not the same. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it gives you a deeper understanding of how to put together some of these more layered, intricate cards. If you loved this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. As always, all of the products will be listed in the description box below, along with a link to the original video where I did do the watercoloring. So as always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.